terrace culture. It's about wearing something that is expensive, something that you can't really put a title on. It's an unwritten rule. It was around about 2002, 2003, and we were looking for vintage Adidas shoes, and somebody in Copenhagen seemed to have a nice stash. I get on the plane, I get to Copenhagen maybe 11 o'clock at night, and maybe 1 o'clock I find the shop, and on the shelf there is a pair of Adidas Corsica. These shoes are just ridiculously rare. I had not seen a pair for 20-odd years. Today I value them at one of the highest prices of any terrace culture shoe. The light's on in the back room, and I can see there's a guy in the office at the back. So I'm banging on the window. He looks at me, he sees me, he goes, "What do you want?" I said, "I've got £3,000 in my pocket." He says, "Come back tomorrow with an estate car and with all your money, and we'll all drive to where I get them from." So the next day we drive 4 hours north, over bridges and bridges and bridges. He takes me to this store. He said, "Right, you can't come upstairs. We'll bring down what you can buy." And then I bought 30 pairs, brought them back to Manchester, put them in the shop, and within like 2 days I'd sold every single pair. It's only cool when nobody knows what it is. When everybody knows what it is, it ain't cool anymore.
There's still the mindset in the north that if London does it, we'll do the opposite. That whole low-profile gum soles, three-stripe, traditional Adidas identity, it's almost like it's in the water here.
The whole difference between London and the north of England is London has so much more diversity. You walk around the streets, you walk around the hood, you walk around the ghettos of London, and you will see everyone's wearing Air Maxes. If you're living and breathing in London, there's no getting away from it.
The UK has really established itself as one of the most culturally significant countries in sneaker culture. And when an entire culture is defined by their love of a shoe, it also speaks to how important shoes are in general.
What is it about shoes? It's all about being unique and looking unique. In the trainer scene in the UK, trainers were seen as valuable as, I would say, jewelry. London is exposed to different cultures coming over and bringing over different vibes. And London purposely became the hub of experimentation from brands. They were like, okay, let's drop this in London. Let's see if there's a taste for it, and then we'll take it elsewhere. Generally, it didn't work anywhere else but in London. When we first opened up S&S sneakers and stuff, it looked very, very different to how you see it now. We've had a couple of refurbishments just to uplift the space and make it look a lot more modern. I think the hottest thing on the rack for me right now is probably the React Element 87. In Paris Fashion Week, it was previewed on the catwalk and it literally broke the internet. Everyone was sharing it, everyone was talking about it. And like, it was a shoe that I wanted to put on my foot straight away. I mean, modern day comfort, and it's just completely new and completely different. Back in the early 70s, I would say London was like anywhere else in England. But gradually, as you move on throughout the 80s and the 90s, it started creating its own identity. They started diversifying their tastes, being first on a trend, first on the latest trainers that were coming out. But if you look at the UK as a whole, there is definitely a north and south divide. And the birth of sneaker culture in the UK, if you really want to go back, it was probably from the terraces of football.
There's going to consistently be a difference when you look at Northern England, particularly because the primary thing that matters is football.
When I was growing up, all we really did was hang around on street corners and play football, or soccer, as you Americans like to call it. And a lot of the fashion and style that I grew up with was all experiential. It was stuff that you saw at the local disco. It was stuff that you saw at the local football match. You would see 15-year-old kids wearing a really expensive sweater with a pair of jeans that were kind of semi-flared at the bottom with a pair of flat gum-sole suede Adidas trainers. It's street fashion in the truest sense of the word. It wasn't celebrity-led, it wasn't music-led, it was genuinely coming from the very bottom end of society.
Gary Aspden, one of the biggest collectors of Adidas, one of the most knowledgeable people about Adidas as a brand. He's a rarity.
He's kind of like the godfather of Adidas in the UK. He finally got his own line, Adidas Special, which was based off of the history and the archives in his personal collection. And if the brand's gonna give the reins to anyone to tell a story for this segment of the population, he's the guy to do it.
The idea of Special was I wanted to create a range that had a very traditional Adidas identity. And when they gave me the green light to do it, I went away and I thought, what does that even mean? And I thought about where I grew up, how I grew up, and I found this kind of odd relationship between the very conservative German sportswear brand being adopted by these very abrasive and edgy British youth cultures. And when you're talking about football style, in the 1970s, it was all about the black leather with the 3 white stripes.
You could say that you love Adidas, and that's great. But if you only love Yeezy, it's time to learn a little bit more about the range.
I meet people all the time and they go, yeah man, I was there back in the day, I was rocking my superstars, and I'm like, not if you were growing up in the UK, you weren't. In the UK, our superstar was the Gazelle. In the 80s, when this style really came into its own and became this huge movement within the UK, people that went to football stood on terraces to watch the game. And that's where the term terrace culture originates from. It was kids who were dressing with extreme attention to detail, the way they put their clothes together, the brands they wore.
But it turned on its head because people wanted to look like tennis superstars going to the football match. So terrace culture really changed quickly from one thing to the next.
I first met Nigel Lawson about 20 years ago at Oi Polloi. I got to know him when they were first starting out.
Oi polloi is a derogatory term used by the upper classes about the lower classes. It means the masses, the humdrum, the workers, but the working classes really are the ones who invented terrace culture.
It was almost like it was working class style. It was something subversive. It was taking things that were not meant for kids like us and reappropriating that.
Well, here it is, the best-selling Adidas shoe in history. It just changed the game, because when I was a kid, people were wearing Samba. Then all of a sudden, everybody started wearing this white shoe without any stripes, with perforation, with the green heel tab, this pure white tennis shoe.
When you walk the streets of England, you will probably see more Stan Smiths than any other individual shoe on feet.
This was such an iconic shoe to me as a kid. I loved wearing it, I loved the shape of it. To me as a kid in Stockport in 1978, I didn't know who the hell Stan Smith was, but I certainly knew what this shoe was. I mean, these clothes were made for millionaires to play tennis in Malibu. They weren't meant for kids off the estate from the northwest of England. The only way they could get it was by stealing it.
The older guys would travel to Switzerland and Austria and Germany, where there was very little security in the shops, and they would come back with holdalls full of expensive designer clothing. It's these symbols of aspiration worn in the context of quite a hard existence. It's clean living under difficult conditions. That's the definition of mod culture. It felt subversive to be wearing designer brands when you were signing on the door. You come through the 80s, which had been a time of recession and gloom. You're talking about Conservative government under Mrs. Thatcher. You're talking about factories closing down. And then all of a sudden, Acid House came along and bang. In the late 80s, casuals and football hooligans had become ravers and were going out to all-night parties, and all that energy was kind of put into this very exciting time. I was a b-boy, I was a breakdancer from 83 until about 86. You're talking about a trainer you wanted to go out and dance in all night. ZX series were perfect. They had these incredible pastel colourways. And the second ZX series used a technology called torsion, and that was the go-to shoe for acid house. It was one of those happy accidents. Adidas could never have been thinking about what was going to be happening on the M25 with warehouse parties.
If you're part of the terrace culture, it's a multi-generational deal. People love the shoes. They know when something is 1 millimeter off.
It's not just about the way somebody dresses, it's about the mindset that accompanies that. There was little money and there was a lot of boredom, so clothes, music and football became everything.
The birth of sneaker culture in the UK. It was all about identity. It was all about being a part of a movement, but it was a different kind of culture. London is a lot more experimental, and it started separating itself from the northern parts of the UK.
You see this broader consumer here. Downstairs right now, people are lining up for a Pata Jordan 7. And there's just diversity in the people.
I grew up in, some would say, the hood, in an area called Brixton, back in the late 80s, early 90s. Lots of immigrants lived there, and we were a part of that cauldron of personalities. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and there was like 4 kids, and every time I came home with a new pair of shoes, my mum was kicking off. But the thing is, I started working when I was quite young. I did my part for the family, but then I saved up to go get my sneakers. Growing up, I was definitely a lot more obsessive of what I wanted to have on my feet versus a lot of my friends. Everyone's getting the same stuff from the JD Sports, from the Foot Lockers, from these chain stores. I want something different. And that's where my obsession really exploded. First shoe I probably fell in love with was Jordan 4s. I had a friend in primary school who got to visit America every single year. He came back after the summertime wearing Jordan 4s, and my mind was blown.
In 1989, Jordan had become the biggest athlete on the planet. And Jordan 4 has consistently come up in London as one of the first shoes that really kind of crossed over.
This is the colorway that really started this obsession, and yeah, it's an obsession.
This one with no swoosh, and the mesh and the colors, just nothing like it, man. The minute you had that shoe on your foot, everyone was looking.
Steve Bryden, he's one of the original Crooked Tongues members. He knows a lot about shoes. One of the guys that I really looked up to when I was younger because he was wearing some crazy stuff.
Even when I was at college, I used to buy and sell shoes, even before there was a reselling thing. I've always been fascinated in what's new and what's coming, and that's always been a passion. Kind of nerdy a little bit, I would say. It was the time when the internet was booming as well, so I was spending a lot of my time on these new sneaker websites, Nike Talk and sneaker.com. We used to see sneakers on a website, you right-click and save. Just have like discs full of pictures of sneakers that you'd never ever see. And I used to write little articles about them and just keep them, keep them saved on floppy disk or wherever. And my friend Chris, who I knew around the way, knew I was into trainers. Our whole crew was basically into shoes. He was like, we're going to start this website about sneakers called Crooked Tongues. Do you want to be involved? I was like, you guys are nuts. You're going to spend time and money to do a website about sneakers? And he was like, well, we should try it, It started off very small, but then we noticed the hits were just insane. And it became one of the, the biggest things on the internet.
The same way that Americans view something like Nike Talk, for the European crowd, Crooked Tongues really was that meeting place where people first went on the internet and talk about all these limited edition stuff and trade shoes and trade ideas and learn more about sneakers.
I started searching the internet, I started joining forums, so I was a part of the Crooked Tongues forum. I was wearing Wovens, I was wearing Dunk SBs, and people were like, where are you getting these? How are you getting these? What are you doing to get these? All these questions started coming up, and I was just like, what do you want me to say? The internet, that's your best friend.
At the time when we first started Crooked Tongues, I would say sneaker collecting was more about vintage. Finding the shoes that you wanted when you were younger, or shoes you didn't have access to. For us, it was about trying to find holy grails, as they're called now.
The Nike Dunk Low SB London.
The London Dunk.
Arguably one of the grails of London. It's one of the rarest shoes in the world.
I think it was 100 pairs.
think it's probably the first London shoe that we got of our own. And the colour is very London. Grey, miserable.
It's got the River Thames on the heel.
Legend has it that Foot Patrol didn't even tell anybody that they were releasing it. You had to know someone at Foot Patrol and quietly ask about it to get access to the shoe.
I got phone calls, people were saying, go down to Foot Patrol today, ASAP, they've just dropped the London Dunk. And I just wanted to get as many as I could. For me, it was all about having a kind of unique perspective on what you wore on your foot and wanting to stand out.
Everything was like a new sneaker revolution. A lot of storytelling, that's what it was back then.
I think that's where sneaker culture was really, really born. Brands started doing a lot more relevant drops, purpose-built for the streets rather than for performers. And then it mutated after that. Then it started going to the ghettos. And the best way of expressing yourself is through your footwear, through your clothing. And in London, that's where the whole Air Max culture came from. Where there's poverty, people want to have the riches. People wanted to wear the latest and greatest, and you could only do that in London. And Grime is the soundtrack to the hood.
Grime music was the result of us as youths growing up listening to US hip-hop, listening to music from our Caribbean cultures, our African cultures, throw in some jungle music and UK garage, and then you've got this kind of mashup of London's version of hip-hop. It was a voice for the kids in the inner cities. It had a different sound, it had a UK sound, it had a UK feel. The MCs were talking about UK stuff, UK slang, and it was the first time that UK rap culture has really had its own identity. Some of the most legendary grime artists have all been through here at some stage. We'd have meetings here, we'd decide, people were writing lyrics here. It all happened here, right here.
Today, we're seeing grime music getting more and more popular globally. You talk about the Skeptors and the Wileys, and all these guys are lyrically so on point. But Dizzee was the one that really kind of brought it into the limelight for the world.
I'm the pioneer. Yeah, facts. Deeper you dig, the more you'll find out. I'm from Bow in East London. I came up on pirate radio, MCing over hard beats and spitting at raves. I grew up in this building. I had my DJ set up there. My friends would come up there, I would DJ, they would MC. Then eventually I would become an MC as well. I lived in this building when I was like, say when I made my first album. If you see on the front of my first album, I'm wearing Air Max. That was like the hood uniform. Trainers were one of them things that I was always into as a kid. People always like, what trainers you got? What trainers you getting? That was always a thing. I don't know a time when it wasn't.
Grime continues to influence a lot of UK culture, especially trainer culture. Grime and trainer culture has always walked hand in hand. I've been collecting since I was in school. We actually had to build a room in our house for myself and my wife's trainer collection. London's always had a few trainers that have been like signature, like the Air Max 95s, the Air Force Ones when they came.
That's the kind of trainers that people wore in the areas where we come from. Before grime was even thought of, it didn't come from the music, it was the other way around.
If you keep talking to people today, everyone would tell you, yeah, Air Max rules the city.
The love for Air Max here has never waned. It has been consistent since it originally came out.
It's definitely an inner city shoe. We made this shoe famous. It wasn't the runners. I didn't see anyone in the marathon wearing them.
But Dizzee was really the first UK artist to have a formal collaboration with Nike.
When I eventually got asked by Nike if I wanted to do a collaboration, me and Ben Drury, it was a no-brainer. And then we did the Tongue and Cheek, which came out with my album, and that one was real suave, like, because the colours and all that. The pink tongue was a touch, that was a bit of genius. It's the little things, the subtle things, you know what I mean? When they came out, I can't remember how much they cost. We only did like 200 or something of them. But I just looked on eBay now, there's one gone for 8 grand, which is mad because I didn't really keep any. I was just giving them away, and I feel like an idiot.
Styles have changed over the years, especially in London. I think comfort is becoming more key, but the North stick to their guns a bit more.
Adidas is part of the fibre of culture. music culture and popular culture came to Adidas. Adidas didn't go to it. So there's this very natural association with culture that no amount of marketing spend can buy for you. So when we created the first Special collection, we did the global launch in Manchester, and it created quite a storm. People who would not ordinarily queue up overnight were queuing up overnight.
Gary brought a recognition of beautiful, simple, classic shapes back to Adidas. It hadn't been worn by these younger generations.
Fact 51Y3, the Hacienda. The Hacienda was a nightclub in Manchester that was opened in 1982 and it closed in the mid-90s. It was so much more than a nightclub. It was a hub for culture. It was a hub of acid house in the northwest of England. So the shoebox here, which looks kind of like a misshapen coffin, is actually in the shape of the Hacienda dance floor. This is so incredibly thorough. Nobody would have expected Y3 at that time to do a collaboration with the Hacienda. It was taking something that was being produced for sports and athletics and putting that into a completely different arena. These different pockets of culture are taking this brand and grafting things onto it and making it their own. Brands are not what people were while they're participating in culture. Brands are actually parts of culture.
You could ask me any question and I could give you a story on how I got those shoes. When I was queuing for shoes, I remember the people that were in front and behind me. I remember the conversations that I was having with those people about the shoes, about what they were up to, about what was going on at that time.
In the US, cool will radically shift from one year to another, and it'll shift by generation. But things that are cool in the UK are forever cool.